Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the several different types of interviews that I've seen in my various interviews that I've done. Obviously as an interviewee, not an interviewer. Maybe one day I'll be an interviewer. Right now I'm always the interviewee. And really these types of interviews I've seen, whether it's been for full stack positions, front end positions, back end positions, and then of course developer adjacent roles like sales engineer, my very first job, which is web accessibility expert and JavaScript developer. Basically these kinds of interviews are used in tech for different reasons by different companies. You can't really pin it by size or by the type of company. All you can really do is just understand that these interviews exist and how to prepare for them. And often you'll be told what kind of interview you'll be going through, a bit of time before you go through that process. So without further ado, number one is the data structure and algorithms interview. This interview is often done as like a filter by companies that are looking for someone who knows foundational computer science skills or concepts. So these questions are often asked about binary trees, pointers. They're often asked about linked lists, arrays. How does computer memory kind of work? The sorting algorithms. What's the purpose of merge sort or insertion sort, or can you implement bubble sort? Why would you not use it? What's the big O of this function right here? Those are all the kind of questions that you'll be asked in a data structure and algorithm interview. The way I prepared for that is I did honestly a bunch of YouTubing, and then of course a bunch of LeetCode. I paid for LeetCode for about like a month or so, and of course you don't have to do that. They have a lot of free ones. I thought by throwing money at it would help. Didn't really seem to do that. I did gain more access to more stuff, but it didn't really increase my computer science knowledge by any means. That is paying for that stuff. Doing the LeetCode problems and all of that, it did help get me ready for the interview and showing the interviewer, what they wanted to see. I'll never forget doing my Amazon Web Services interview. I was ready for that question about linked list, and I had my solution out there, and I was asked about how to do a check of a string as a palindrome, and I was there for it, and that was because of that grind I did. So if you have one of those kind of interviews coming along, I would definitely do a bit of LeetCode. Don't overdo it. A month at most is is most I would recommend for it. If you need a book, the book that I would recommend, most folks seem to follow in recommending this book, is Cracking the Code Interview. I have this book, and it wasn't particularly helpful for me when I was getting ready for my job interview. I didn't really know Java or C++, and that book is really aimed at folks who know that. At the time I knew just JavaScript, so obviously if you are going to read that book, just know that it is in Java and C++ primarily. And then the second kind of interview I want to talk about is the take-home. My first experience with this type of interview was at the web accessibility and JavaScript developer position. So basically that job had 4 different rounds of interviews, and I was given a PDF with some instructions on I had to make a page. There was an example page. I had to be fully accessible, obviously because it's a web accessibility position, and it had to be fully responsive. And there's a little bit of JavaScript in there, but it's primarily an HTML and CSS test, and then I had to put it onto GitHub. At the time, it was my first test. It seemed a little complicated, but I was able to get through it in the time slot that they gave me. I have received other ones that are much more complicated than that now for more senior positions. That was my really first kind of exposure to that for that role. If you are going to have that kind of interview, that kind of test really is more what it is. My advice is don't use ChatGPT purely to create the application. They will see that, they'll understand that ChatGPT did it, and they'll just throw your application right in the trash. They'll probably tell all their friends that you did that. The tech world's very small. It's not worth doing that. What I would do is practice your projects, look up challenges. There's like a ton of stuff out there for front-end challenges, back-end challenges. All depends on what kind of position you're aiming for and you're interviewing for. Do those challenges, and that'll help you get to the position to where whatever they give you, you'll be able to get it and crush it very quickly. The third type of interview is pair programming. Pair programming, for those of you who don't know, is when in a remote situation you'll be sharing your screen and someone will be asking you questions about what kind of code you're writing. They'll give you a situation, you'll start writing it. They'll ask you, why'd you do that? Why'd you name this variable this way? But those questions are designed so that you can explain yourself, your thought process, which is really what that interview is all about. I've had this interview for a number of positions. I haven't really had this quite often. One time that I can really think of that this stands out for me when I did have this type of interview is when I was doing a full stack interview at the junior level. Basically, the interviewer asked me to write this function that it was an asynchronous function with a promise. I had to give it a string to the function, and then after a second, it had to resolve the promise with the string in it, and then another function had to call that and log out the result. And during that whole process, I was being asked, okay, why'd you use a new keyword? What does that do? And that sort of a thing. And then that was really just to show I understood what I was doing. doing, and I had to just memorize something by rote. So if you do have one of those kinds of interviews, my recommendation is to think through the problem that's being asked. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. And then of course, when you are writing out your code in front of this person, whether it's in person or remote, don't be afraid to, if they ask you a clarifying question, don't be afraid to take a second and go, okay, this is what they're asking, why am I doing this? And then responding. They're really only asking you that question to see what your thought process is. And so as long as you're showing that, it's kind of like you're in elementary, middle school where you're showing like long division and long multiplication. It's kind of like that. And that's really all they're checking, is making sure that, you do have, some kind of methodology to what you're doing. The fourth kind of interview is the interrogation, which, I jokingly call it that, but that's really when like someone, it could be multiple people, but typically it's one person kind of sits down there with a sheet of paper and starts asking you like, just weird questions, questions that are really kind of vague about your language. One I can think of, that one interrogation that I did, or had done to me, I guess, was on JavaScript. There was a question there about hoisting, and they showed me some code, and they were like, what's this going to print and why? And I had to go into hoisting. What does hoisting do? How does hoisting work in JavaScript with that var keyword and function keyword? And that's really all they're checking, is making sure that, you do have some kind of methodology to what you're doing. You'll be asked basically to whiteboard like a little bit of code, but I almost did the Spock thing right there, right? But the number five. The fifth type of interview I want to talk about is the whiteboard. This kind of interview is generally done by FANG tech companies, that's your Facebook, your Amazon, your Netflix, your Google, but it also is done a lot by startups in Israel. It's kind of like the paired programming interview. It's really to see your thought process, how much do you understand foundational concepts in computer science, how well you're able to articulate yourself. The kind of question that you're going to ask to be whiteboard on, it really depends on a number of things: the seniority of the position, the role, the company culture, and that kind of a thing. The time I had to do it was when I did my interview for AWS, and there I was actually just asked to whiteboard. It was a fairly simple whiteboarding process, but it had to do with some linked lists and how I would find the value that I was looking for. So I just whiteboarded that out, showed how I was doing that, showed I understood what a linked list was, how I would iterate through it. I was asked about the big O notation of it, and that sort of a thing. Really the preparation for that is, it's similar to the paired programming. You really want to be like clear in your articulation of what you're doing and the problem. You can ask clarifying questions, and then of course actually physically whiteboard that out versus coding it somewhere in text editor. On a personal note, that's a pet peeve of mine for doing whiteboarding, because I have carpal tunnel and it's just always nasty and my handwriting is atrocious. So the interviewer is always like, I don't think I understand what you wrote there, but you articulated well. So it's my least kind of favorite interview. Number 6 is the pop quiz. This is basically very similar to the interrogation, where the interviewer just starts asking you random questions about your language that you're going to be working with, the tech stack you're going to be working with. And really, the preparation for this kind of interview, it's very similar to the interrogation. You just got to be familiarizing yourself with the tech stack, really learn the language that they're going to be using, and then all the nuances behind it, and then just kind of having that information ready. There really, isn't too much to that type of an interview other than just having that kind of information. The number 7 and final type of interview is the round robin. This is probably the most interesting type of interview out of all these interviews, because it varies by company. I've had this interview done at every single company I've worked at, every single company that I have been given an offer, not been given an offer, and it's always towards like the final stages of the interview process. It's just a very interesting type of interview. The last time I had this done, it was towards the end of the interviewing process, and I was interviewed by 2 different groups of 4 people, and in those groups were non-technical product people, senior developers, and one of them, the lead architect was there, software architect was there. The kind of questions you get in that kind of a group, it really depends on the person. It varies so much. And one thing that makes you stand out during this type of interview is engaging with everyone. So like when the software architect is asking you questions, you're answering those questions in a way that the software architect is going to appreciate that kind of an answer, but you also want to not make it too technical. I mean, it's fine if you accidentally do that, but you generally don't want to make it too technical. You want to keep the product people, the non-technical people interested in, because you are going to be working with those people quite a bit. They are very critical to your team as far as understanding the business needs. They are your connection between the business and what happens technically. So really, being able to communicate with them is very important to the job. And of course, when the product people ask you questions, you want to think about, okay, why are they asking that kind of a question? Most of the time it has to deal with a business question. And then you just want to answer, how you're addressing the business needs, how you're very passionate about the business, what you bring to the team, and really just showing that you're very easy to work with and communicate with them. And then of course, if a senior developer starts asking you questions about technical, don't be afraid to get very, very technical. Sometimes senior developers generally do that. I've seen that they're generally bad interviewers, and that's just kind of the way it rolls. It all depends on who's asking those types of questions. So you really just want to know your audience. But yeah, so that's all the kinds of interviews I want to talk about today. Thanks so much for coming by, and I hope to see you all again soon.